personal knowledge here. How's that? Tonight is a looking backward to where we came from, how our art formed, and particularly the language, the techniques, where they came from. So we asked these distinguished gentlemen and distinguished lady to address some of these things. And so I'm going to kick off real quick. Back in the 1880s, fight directing at that point had been a profession in that somebody was actually paid to set a fight for about 70 years. Then we had a couple of seminal characters, Alfred Hutton and the Bertrand, father and son, who were setting the styles in London, and they had a spin-off effect in the United States as well. Alfred Hutton was historical fencing, and the Bertrands were more classical fencing, which eventually became sport fencing, but they were military fencing people. These two styles you could see on the West End stage and on the New York stages for about 20 years. And then we had this revolution in film. Started around, well, the earliest is 1890s something, but where you started to see the fencers entering into the film was about 1910, 1920. And the fencers that came over that had the most effect on that were guys who trained in Brussels, like Fred Paddy and Udenholm. So they're becoming dominant in terms of a style. It's not that historical fencing died away on stage, but it was less dominant through the 20s and 30s, 40s obviously. Now we're in the 50s. And we started to have scholars, very, very young scholars at this point, but Jonathan Waller and eventually Bill Hobbs. Now at this point, you gentlemen knew these folks. You knew Hobbs and Waller. Jonathan Hill, we were talking a bit about the influence of Hobbs and his historical approach and how that spun off in other countries. Could you address that? We were talking a bit about what happened in France and etc.
Okay. I just got to reorganize that in my brain. Bill, I was talking about Bill was a fencer, yeah? As far as we know. Australian fencer, and so that was his training. John Waller was the historical person that looked at all the manuscripts, and his fencing style is very much turning the page. In France, see, I'm English. Who the hell knows what's going on in France? Let's face it, do I care? Especially now. There's Maitre Carlier, who's an esteemed fencing maitre. The French have this incredible system of Maitre des Armes, of which Jacques Capel is a Maitre des Armes from France, although he's not. And this maitre has his salle in Paris, and he's doing it, and his son Michel is taking over. But Bill gets invited to do Cyrano de Bergerac in France, which is an extraordinary honor, if you like, that one of the top French films is being directed by an Australian Englishman.
That's black and white, isn't it?
Yeah.
Black and white film.
That was the earlier one.
Yeah, that's what I said.
But Michel Carlier was doubling for Cyrano and working for Bill as a fight double. And it's very interesting then to watch when you see the films that Michel has choreographed since. Italian's Daughter and something like that. You can see the influence that Bill has on Michel, because Michel is brought up with this French fencing style, pure fencing, as was Cavans, as was Beethoven, all those people, and as was my teachers, all pure fencers who then went into this art. But you can see that style developing and changing and through that. So the influences going backwards and forwards. But Bill was into realistic style fighting. That's what his whole thing was about. I'm trying to create the realism of the period, even though we are teaching some modern fencing moves, but we put style and create, and then get the actors to do their job. sell it. Does that help?
It does. And the other characters in the play, of course, are Henry Marshall and Jonathan Waller. And both JP and Dave, you knew these men. In fact, I think, didn't you train with Henry?
Oh, yeah, I worked with him, or I studied with Henry at RADA twice a week. Comedy hour and fencing, he was great. But he was very knowledgeable, and he had done a lot of research in historical work. And a friend of his had the 16 major printed, the original printing books of Fabry, yeah, he had Angelo, he had 16 of them. And I went over to his place, and they were beautiful books. So Henry used a guy named Leonard Chase, and Leonard was Henry's source for the historical study. And Henry's wife, who's a British actress, an English actress, Stephanie Cole, they'd clear a bit of furniture, and Henry would say, okay, Stephanie, we're going to try out some of these historical things. And she said, okay. So she went through that for us. And so Henry developed a beginnings into that historical side as well. And he was also a resource for all of us that came behind. And then Ian Mackay was another teacher there who taught us unarmed primarily. And Bill, I was allowed to watch Bill at his school. And it was interesting because the style of work in his movies was what was happening at his school. And what he taught his students first was fencing. They had to take fencing for a year. And then the following year, they were allowed to move into stage combat. But they all had to have their basis in fencing. And he believed that. And I kind of agree with that. I think it helps. I think you don't have to necessarily, but it really, really helps. Gives you a much deeper understanding. And then there was also John Waller. And John Waller, I didn't really know him all that well. I went to 2 classes of his, and because of the schedule, it never happened that I got to him more than that.
Yeah, Dave, you knew John, didn't you?
No, but I'm looking for Jeff Alm.
Okay.
The fellow up here with his hand up, John Waller, and
Yeah.
he knows more than I by far.
Did you work with him at Leeds?
No, I worked with him at the drama studio. He was my teacher. He was my first combat teacher. And I just went and saw him this past summer. He's 75, and he's retired now, so we went up and shot longbows in his garden. And his son Jonathan has taken over a lot of his teaching gigs. And so I hadn't seen John in 40 years, but I had corresponded a little bit. And, you know, and his whole bent was that he wasn't, to my understanding, a fight director who was very interested in doing fight stuff for the theater. The historical stuff was much more interesting to him. And so he became the head interpreter at the Armory at Leeds, and I think he did that for 20 years or so. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, that's correct, yeah.
And so, yeah, so...
But the film that he's known for is
Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And John did all the historical sword fighting. I don't think he was into all the cutting off of the arms and the legs. But the earlier sequences are historically based, and that's where John.
He was an archer. He was an archer, and then I think he said in 1962, he helped found the Medieval Society,
Yeah.
and those people began to interpret the text and took him on a journey that way. So that's what I know about him.
His side. Ian Mackay, but David, you know Ian Mackay, you trained with him.
Well, Ian was your mentor.
Yeah. Yeah, he sort of was.
He taught you at East 15?
He's 15, yeah.
And his primary focus, his approach toward stage combat is what?
Very much like Bill Hobbs, very much into realism. He was quite good at unarmed combat. I still think to this day that that's been a big influence on me as far as my interest in unarmed combat. But he was I mean, he had done some fencing, but he was also an actor, and so he acted a lot on stage, and then would choreograph as well. So he's a real tough Scotsman who grew up with little nonsense, and but he was very much into realism.
Okay, hold on, apparently we started a dance routine. Then there's the master who was more along the lines of the Golden Age of swashbuckling. That was Paddy Crane. And Brad, that was your mentor.
Yeah, but really, everybody sitting here is my teacher as well.
Of course.
It's true.
It's true.
But Paddy's approach was more along the lines of the Hollywood fencers. Was that your experience?
JP, you can, say much more to that. What I know is that when Patty and I would talk, the most available folks, for those movies were Olympic fencers or Olympic trained fencers. And so it was more saber oriented, the footwork and all that. He said that a lot of the older guys that would work on them, they would go off and maybe do some historical rapier and dagger and whatnot, but they wouldn't bring that back into the movie because that's they didn't have the talent that would be able to do those kind of complex historical techniques. And so,
Yeah, he was Hollywood, but he was also, he used to always say, if you can marry the world of fencing, sport fencing, to the theatrical, that was his idea of the ideal. So that was, and I don't think he ever really dreamed that things would reach what they have at this stage. But he was ecstatic when he got to come here a handful of times because Brad, and I don't know how many of you young guys know this, but Brad brought us all together years, I'm just gonna say this right now. Brad brought us all together in 1994 or 5, whatever that was, to Washington DC.
92.
92?
Yeah.
And we all met each other for the first time. Paddy was there. And from then on, it sparked this, and Brad kept this thing going. And we're all here because Brad did that. And I think you guys should really know that. Because I know that, and I know that none of this would have reached this stage. We all might be doing this somewhere, but nothing like this. This is, Brad helped Paddy realize this dream. And I think, and there's a lot of soul in that. And there's a lot of passion right across this table, and through you guys too. And people like the Martinez would never have been brought into the theatrical side because they're professional martial artists. So now we have a real mix, and we're taking advantage of, and we're learning on a broader scope. So we're expanding our knowledge right across the board, and it wouldn't have happened had that not happened. And he promoted that, and these guys picked it up and brought it to us all. So, and I'm a receiver too, and I love it.
I think we actually have the Paddy Crane video ready. Correct?
We'll give it another blow
Let's try.
with a very small speaker. You just have to lean in. So just let me know if